Speedy Fraser from the Women Business Collaborative. And we will not sleep as we accelerate the change in gender equality, equity, with equal position and power for business women, not only the US, but worldwide. And with that, we just say thank you to this accelerated panel of business women in the C-suite and on boards, as you'll hear. We also want to highlight that next Thursday, on May 13th, we've got a major session on catalyzing the future for business women. Some 500, 600 women have signed up. We welcome in. We welcome all of your companies. We also have a CEO forum on May 26th. 4 women CEOs speak on that panel. We want to point out our 49 organization partners and our 9 action initiatives. And some of you that have dialed in today are on boards, as you'll hear from Jill as well. But today, we also signify that as we monitor change on CEOs and C-suite and boards and entrepreneurs and women in capital, we note that the boards for 6 months have been 40% women are being appointed, and last month it was 25% women of color. What we've got from board directors is an increase for the year of 245 new women joining boards, and 218 men have left the boards for the net increase for women. Again, we measure the data and change. So if we could turn to this amazing panel and the 2 moderators, Aster Angagaw, independent director just named to the Owens and Minor Board of Directors, former president for services of ServiceMaster brands, and former head of Sodexo Healthcare. We are thrilled, Aster, that you are on our WBC advisory. And to Johanna Zeilstra, the CEO of Gender Fair, chair of our WBC Trailblazers, on our WBC Roundtable, and as we announce our Summit for All, September 21st, 22nd, is extraordinary. And we do have the CEOs of Dow Chemical, Jill, and we do have the CEOs of General Motors. We're working with IBM and others, so we salute all of you. And we want to focus that global women are so important. And Jose is one of our 3 chairs of our Global Advisory Council. And with that, we'll turn it over to Aster. And thank you, Lorena Fembres, for all you do to set this up. Have a great call.
Thank you, Edie. I am honored to be here today, and thank you for the panelists again. I want to extend a warm welcome to the Women in Business Collaborative Executive Roundtable. Today's topic is Women in Business, a Global Perspective. Fortune 500 executives, as the ones on this panel, often lead global teams, and they have to balance varied cultures, regulations, and company policies in leading teams. The issues facing women worldwide are becoming increasingly similar. COVID is an excellent example of that. But our regulatory and company policies remain inconsistent. This panel discussion focuses on how women leaders who are global actors leverage their understanding, learnings, and best practices to improve companies and regulatory policies. I recently interviewed 19 women from 10 countries for my upcoming book and learned more about the similarities of the issues facing women, but also the compartmentalized societal responses. We all understand and hear from global D&I experts that companies' responses have to be local. Of course, we get that, since culture, socioeconomic condition, and geopolitical issues are different country by country. But we need to debunk the idea that our responses have to be entirely local. The impetus for the Women in Business Collaborative formation is to bring the various women organizations in the US together and work on common issues. To that end, we now have more than 40 women organizations in the US working together to create a more powerful force and accelerate the advancement of all business women to achieve gender diversity and pay parity in the workplace. The organization's ambition is not limited to the US and plans to expand to other parts of the world and be a global force that supports and amplifies women in business worldwide. Women Business Collaborative is focused on creating visibility, measurement, and drive accountability. Today, we have gathered distinguished women from Europe, Canada, and the US to discuss a few topics, such as their own journey, the impact of COVID, women-friendly policies, the role of boards, and measurement and transparency from a global perspective. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, I want to share with you that Flavia Bittencourt, General Manager Adidas Brazil, was not able to join us since she has to attend a personal matter. Even though we will miss Flavia and we hope she will join future events, we are excited to have these three panelists who will expertly address all issues outlined earlier. It is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Jill Wyant, a global executive and an independent director for Dow, a nearly 50 billion material science company. Jill is a senior strategy and operating executive with over 25 years of experience leading Fortune 500 businesses in the industrial and healthcare sector. Until very recently, she served as the executive vice president and president for global regions at Ecolab, where she had ownership of a $6 billion P&L. Jill has held domestic international sector leadership role with an expat assignment in Switzerland. Jill earned an MBA degree with the highest honor from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and graduated summa cum laude from the University of St. Thomas with bachelor's degrees in international marketing and yes, Japanese studies. Jill is married and she and her husband have a 12-year-old son. She and her family love the outdoors and are avid skiers, hikers, and mountain bikers. I met Jill a couple of years ago at a networking event where we hit it so quickly, and we will stay connected and call on each other for help anytime we need to. Thank you, Jill. I really appreciate you being here.
Hello. I would like to introduce to you Marta Martínez, who was appointed General Manager, IBM EMEA on July 20th, 2020. In this role, she's responsible for IBM's strategy, execution, business, client satisfaction, and team development in a geography spanning more than 100 countries. Previously, she was General Manager for IBM Spain, Portugal, Greece, and Israel, a role she took in 2013. And prior to that, Marta was General Manager of IBM Global Technology Services in the same region. Marta joined IBM in 2003 as a sales leader in communications industry for Spain and Portugal, and in 2006 appointed Vice President Sectors, leading the sales and distribution organization, handling business relationships with IBM's main clients in Spain, Portugal, Greece, and Israel. In 2008, she worked at IBM's headquarters here in New York as Vice President of ITS Worldwide Sales. Marta holds a degree in mathematics from Complutense University of Madrid and an executive management program degree from IESE Business School. She's married with 3 children. Thank you, Marta, for being here. And our final panelist, Nabeela Ixtabalan, leads the Human Resources and Corporate Affairs for Walmart Canada, which has over 90,000 associates and more than 400 stores nationwide. Her career spans nearly 20 years of experience with 3 of the world's most recognized brands. Walmart, IKEA, and Starbucks coffee in the US, Canada, and Europe. Nabeela was previously head of digital transformation at Inga, leading IKEA's digital and retail transformation globally across 41 countries. In 2017, she was appointed to the TaskRabbit Board of Directors. In 2019, she joined the Future Skills Center of Canada as a board advisor. This is a pan-Canadian effort focused on skill development and employment training to help Canadians transition to the changing economy. Nabeela also serves as a board member for the Miracle Foundation, a US and India-based organization whose ambition is to help find a loving home for every single orphan child in the world. And Nabeela graduated with a dual degree in marketing and supply chain. She resides in Ontario, Canada with her family, including an 11-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl who's apparently going on to 20. By the way, Walmart Canada was recently recognized as the country's leading company that's championing inclusion and diversity for all Canadians and increasing the percentage of female store managers by 3% and market leaders by 9% last year alone. So welcome to you, Nabeela, and the rest of our panelists. And I'd like to kick this discussion off now that we know all about your formal bios and all the many accomplishments in your career. I'm sure the audience would like to hear something more personal from you. So I'd like to start by asking each panelist to reflect back on their career and share a bit more about what helped or accelerate your progress to where you are now. And what, if anything, you would do differently if you had another chance? So I'd like to start first with Nabeela, and then Marta, and then Jill.
Thank you so much. And I'm really honored to be here with such an amazing panel and people. So really excited to be here. When I reflect on my personal career journey, I think one of the things that's been defining in my progression is I never asked for permission to learn anything. I was never waiting for an invitation to join a meeting or a forum. I really was very intentional in inserting myself in the areas where I wanted to learn. And I think that was really pivotal in my journey. I've also spoken openly about my journey professionally and that I consider myself a recovering workaholic. And that over my journey and my growth professionally, that I really struggled to balance my both work and life. I think it's something many women and people in general struggle with. And if I were to do it all again, I would have slowed down and I would have made sure that my personal well-being was equally in balance as my professional ambitions. And that's something I advise all of the people that I talk to do: make personal well-being and wellness part of your brand as you grow, instead of waiting to do that when you've, so to speak, achieved your professional success.
Great, thank you. Marta, how about yourself?
Okay, what I, in my experience from the beginning of the career, I think I have some key focus areas. First, about always try to enjoy what I do. Okay, always I have select and to feel that really like the job I did in that moment. And then when I started to be comfortable, I felt that I didn't progress. Then I had clear that I need a chance, okay, to move on. For me, always learning and being a challenge. This means I'll continue learning in all the jobs I have taken. Other important point is about identify the key people. This means not only part is the reference people that you think is role model for you, and you be clear this is the people could help, but even the networking overall. What is going to key people during the in the organization could help you, and it could be interesting for you, and it's important to have these key people identified. Because for me, I have always a very strong gut feeling, in terms of the people. This means what is the people who gives really positive energy or not, and to really be far for the negative people. It's very important. To really care who is the people who is going to inject the right energy you need. And for me, last important point perhaps is, is about I have always own it and my own career. I have taken my decision by myself, okay, because I have the recommendation to control your career, because perhaps sometimes others control whatever you know in the company, you know, outside. And I think it's important you take the control of the career. I have done from the beginning, and I think it's something that is has been useful during all the different steps. I think not special, to be clear, you know, not special regrets. I think in terms of the, I could do the same, perhaps steps more or less, okay?
That's great, Marta. I like those points, good learnings. And lastly, Jill, what about you? How has your journey been, and what obstacles have you overcome, and what has accelerated, and any kind of things you would do differently?
Yeah, I think and I love, you know, the advice that has been shared. I would sort of echo a lot of that. I think for accelerators, I'd say two things. The first is taking risks. And that sounds like pretty standard advice, you know, changing jobs, changing companies, moving internationally. For me, I found actually as my career progressed, imposter issue, you know, that voice inside my head, actually the imposter syndrome got a little bit worse. I was always the first one to leap in the deep end of the pool and figure, you know, I'd get a great team and figure it out. I think particularly for women, as we grow in our careers, as our responsibilities at home and at work get bigger, I've talked to a lot of women who experience the same. And so for me, that was about facing my imposter syndrome head on and, you know, surrounding myself with people I could trust who would encourage me and just really pushing through some of that. The second accelerator I would cite, and Marta mentioned this a bit, is just be somebody people want to work for. At the end of the day, every business is people in some way, shape, or form. And people, when you have a reputation as, you know, not setting low standards, but as being someone where people feel like they can be challenged, but in a supportive way, they can be empowered, but held accountable. That has been a real accelerator for my businesses, my teams, and for me personally. And then, you know, what would I do differently? I saw something that the CEO of Stitch Fix, who was previously the largest, you know, IPO billionaire, I think she was surpassed by the CEO of Bumble, who talked about, you know, and it really resonated with me. She said, you know, I'm a pretty pragmatic leader and I have very bold visions. I have a clear, you know, picture of where we're going to the future. I just need to continue to remind myself to tell others about that, tell the board about that, tell the CEO about that. I mean, I always reminded my team we shaped that together, but I think that's a lot of women. We tend to go heads down, do the work. You have to tell the story, and you have to tell it 100 times more than you think you need to. And so that, when I heard that from Katrina Lake, of former, I think she just stepped down, that really resonated with me. So that's what I'd cite as a lesson learned that I'm doing differently now.
That's great. Well, I'm taking notes. These are some really great points. Thank you for sharing. Aster?
Yeah, I think to the point that we just discussed, I think COVID in this recession has been taking over. So in 2020 and with COVID-19, we saw women exiting the workforce in record numbers. And currently over 2 million women are contemplating leaving their job or have left their job. We know this affects women of color significantly. The pandemic poses and threatens to wipe out years of progress. According to the World Economic Forum, it will take us 136 years to close the gap that we just experienced. So how do we recover and encourage women to recover from this and encourage women to join in the workforce or retain those who are contemplating departure? What do you think as leaders and also your organizations should be doing to reverse this trend? And I'll start maybe with Jill.
Yeah. Well, Aster, thank you so much for asking this question. I think it's vitally important. And I'm going to focus principally, most nations around the world experienced she sessions, but very few experienced them to the extent that the US did. So I'm going to focus my remarks on the United States and just a few grounding facts. I mean, April of 2020 was the worst month for female labor participation rates since they began collecting statistics during World War II. We have 1 out of 2 moms in April of 2020 was not in the labor force. and we are back to where we were in the early 80s. So we've lost 40 years of progress. And women are still 4 to 5 times more likely, they're still on the ledge, 4 to 5 times more likely than their male peers to be contemplating exiting the workforce. And so in my mind, this is not a woman issue. This is not an issue of feminism. This is an economic issue. It's a business issue. So I'll start there. And many of us on this call can juggle, right? We can Zoom it, we can throw in a load of laundry. I mean, there are millions of women who have still not regained jobs and are facing food security issues, child security issues, kids have lost generations. So, we're in a quandary. I think there's public policy and company implications. And I'll start maybe with governments and some people have said to me, oh, we can't point to the government. Well, respectfully, yes, we must. Because again, we have to think of women and children as infrastructure in society. Again, it's not a woman's issue. And so in my mind, we got to stop nibbling at the edges. So what does the US need to do? I mean, unlike many other industrialized nations, there are big gaps in paid family leave, in pay equity, and in affordable childcare. People pay more in this country for childcare than they do for housing. It's a problem. And so I think, and you've seen President Biden now do this with his American Families Plan, propose, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in investment in those 3 areas. Many countries have safety nets. America has moms and caregivers. And we have got, from an economic point of view, from an infrastructure point of view, really stop the talk and get to action. And so I think there are real public policy implications. I think from a company perspective, a lot of companies, Dow, Ecolab, companies I'm familiar with, have done a lot around modernizing benefits programs, extending parental leave. I think we'll talk about that later in the conversation. I think tactically, we've got to be very aggressive around things like returnships, targeted campaigns to bring women back into the workforce. We've got to think about, do we have to provide flexible, in the near term here where people are still juggling, paid childcare subsidies, elder care help in the short term, maybe temporary benefits. And then I think longer term, what this pandemic has revealed is shining a light on the diversity of the pipeline is only one thing. And extending benefits is a very important step to be applauded. But now we've got to take the stigma out of using those benefits. 20% of women say if they take time off to care for a sick, a loved one or take some parental leave, they're fearful that it will have negative ramifications on their career trajectory. So how to create safe environments where people can have lives and earn livelihoods and nobody worries about a stigma being attached. So that's my perspective on the scope of the challenge. I think some of the public policy implications, particularly in the US. And then I think, hey, for companies, it's a great time to be recruiting female talent because there are millions of women out there waiting to be gainfully employed. So thanks for the question.
That's great, Jill. Thank you so much. I think it's really important to highlight the differences between country to country. And I think although the issues are very similar, so I really appreciate that. Nabeela, how about you, and especially the Canadian perspective as well?
Yeah, I could actually echo much of what Jill has said. In Canada, similar statistical reality. In April 2020, we saw a mass exodus of women in the labor market to the degree that we hadn't seen since the 1980s. So what we specifically did when we saw this happening before our eyes is we really just took a time out as an organization, and we really looked at our culture, diversity, equity, inclusion strategy and asked ourselves, what do we need to do to really try to ebb this flow and change the trajectory that we were experiencing? And we needed to really focus more radically on our women and female talent. And Johanna, you talked a little bit about some of the results that we've seen so far. One of the things that we did is we had this accelerator program for female talents in our stores. And we actually just took an outside-in perspective. I don't know if you guys are familiar, in Toronto, there's this great organization called the Knowledge Society. They build unicorn people, and they take a teenager, and that's 13 or 14 or 15, and in 10 months, get them to learn how to do PhD level work in STEM research. And so we reached out to them and we said, can you help us look at our female development program and how we can accelerate and protect the women that are in our leadership positions to keep them engaged and employed with us? And so we put 56 women in this program, Rising Star program, and we've seen a 47% promotion rate. So out of those 56 women, 47% of them have either promoted either 1 level or 2 level in 10 months. This is a program that in the past, we would have seen promotion rates after 2 or 3 years. And so really just thinking very differently about how we can promote and support women, and really just, you know, going through a consortium of resources to invite, you know, outside organizations and different thoughts into how do we develop female leadership. We also saw a 9% increase in our market leaders, as you mentioned earlier. And one of the reasons why I think we have been able to shelter and protect our female leaders at Walmart Canada is we also put this issue with the facts on the main stage as an executive leadership team. So, you know, we have an annual meeting and we have lots of opportunities where we basically brought this problem statement to the entire organization and engaged an army of our leadership team across the organization to say we need to do something to make sure that we protect the female leadership in the organization. And then I say the third thing that we're really working on is aggressively auditing all of our people practices. I'm a people practitioner, and people practices are insidious for bias. And I think we're also taking a time out and using third parties to support us in auditing our promotional processes, our hiring processes, to really just take stock about, again, is there anything in our system we can do to root out those biases where they exist. And lastly, I would say just a huge emphasis on radical self-care, well-being, and flexibility. And I say radical because the times that we're in require radical focus to protect women and to make sure that they have the psychological safety and the permission, to Jill's point, to challenge the stigma and the fear that they're facing, to ask for what they need to stay in the workforce.
Great, Nabeela, thank you so much. That was very insightful. Marta, I know you have an expanded responsibility in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and I'm sure you have a lot to say on this topic.
Yes, of course, and thank you for the question because it's absolutely critical. And I agree what you say in terms of what is affected in terms of the woman in this COVID situation, because we have the research institution here doing some studies and survey, and we have done for what has affected in terms of the diversity, especially in women, and the results doing the survey for more than 1,000 companies around the world, and clearly the women push it all out of the workforce more than the men. Okay, this is really important metric, and it's a pity, no? But in terms of the IBN, and of course we have to recover the situation. We have not suffered in IBN in terms of we have the metrics in 2020, you know, around the pandemic, and in terms of the percent of the population we have in IBN overall, and in EMEA is the same, is 34% of the population is woman, and 36% of the promotion has been woman. Okay, this is, okay, it's not a parity, but it's in a good shape, and it's, you know, we have not lost during the pandemic. But in terms of the programs that we are always in place, because for us the diversity, and it's not only the woman, but the diversity overall is absolutely critical, and we put really programs all the time. And in terms around the woman, we are at the beginning of the career is very important at the moment. Okay, how we are going to put the help and the mentorship and all the programs to help in terms of the beginning of the career, how it's going to be follow the development of the woman, because sometimes, you know, when they're starting in terms of they are going to be moms or they are going to be married, there has some big question, and then we have to be close to these people to continue, you know, helping in the development. And specific we do for the technical population, because, you know, we are a technology company, even if we are very focused in the technology woman population, because it's very important, because it's not the same percent due to the even university degrees and different in the different countries. We take care about what is the technology woman evolution in terms of from the beginning of the career. I think it's very, very important. And obviously, you know, at this, Nabeela has mentioned, okay, we have done during the pandemic about well-being, psychological support, because obviously, you know, the woman has will suffer more in terms of what is responsibilities overall out of the work, and we have been very close to them, and this has been very well perceived. It's very, very important in that case, okay? This is what we are doing.
Great, thank you so much. I think the insight around shelter and protect training, I think it's really, really important policies and really making sure we're implementing the best of the best policies in each companies and looking for regulation as well. And I love the whole idea of radical self-care. I think that is something we definitely need to give ourselves permission to say we need to be able to manage all this activity, but we have to be able to take care of ourselves first. But again, companies really helping returnship is going to be really, really important, and supporting company women to be successful during this difficult time. So thank you for your point of views.
Yeah, so my question is, and you've touched on it a little bit, especially when it comes to some of the benefits or lack of benefits that are provided in each of our respective countries. But you all lead global teams, and with that comes different, cultures and practices, even within your own organization. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time discussing, a little bit more about the employee policies and benefits, particularly for working moms, and how they are different from country to country. For example, when I was transferred from Canada to the US with a large consulting firm, my healthcare costs went up, my maternity leave went down, and work from home policies was not even considered at the time. So my question really surrounds, your organization, and what policies and benefits are standard across all regions and countries that your business operates in, and what are more unique to the local or regional office? And as more female leaders are being transferred or moved from one region to another, sometimes it's temporarily, other times it's permanently, and you've all had that experience of moving from one place to another. Do they retain the benefits and policies of the home office, or do they adapt to the local benefits like I had in my early career? I'd love to, first talk to Nabeela to get her opinion on that, and then Jill and Marta.
Yeah, so Walmart operates obviously in many countries, and I would say that the benefits are local. There aren't generalized benefits that apply across all countries. Now, obviously, when women do relocate with a mobility package, there's additional support both for them and their partner and family in that mobility package to help keep them whole as they move between countries comparative to their home country package. But there's always going to be a localization factor when it comes to benefits, as women move between our countries. What I would say in general is that, when it comes to the differentiation between the countries in our markets, is that every single country is taking stock of, the offer for women. And there's a tremendous focus on, again, protecting and sheltering and supporting women to stay engaged in the workforce. So, the starting point is different country to country. I've also worked in Canada and the US and transferred between the two. Johanna, so I had the similar experiences to what you described. And I think this conversation around, how do we work both as an organization, but to Jill's earlier point, also support, the right type of initiatives from a public policy perspective is really important. Here in Canada, we just saw a proposal for, government-supported childcare for the first time in Canada. Specifically, when it comes to childcare, has one of the lowest spends in GDP comparatively as an OECD country. And so even though we do have lots of other benefits within Canada compared to the US, we still have areas where both organizations and the public sector need to work together to provide the right support. And then I would also say, around flexible work, this is also a double-edged sword, right? I like to say that, the current state of how we're working in a remote environment is not the litmus test for what flexible work should be, because, most cases in the future, we're not both working and schooling online and trying to do all the other things that I think women are facing in today's day and age. But I'm excited to see that, flexibility is going to take a new definition for the future. And that's ultimately, I think, going to create an equalizer for women in the future as well, which is exciting.
Great. Well, it's nice to see Canada and the government, stepping up to support childcare. We're hoping, and I know, Jill, you mentioned that certainly the Biden administration is looking at these kinds of policies as well. Can you expand a little bit more about your views, not only, you know, of our administration, but also, you know, your work experience here in the US.
Yeah, so I think that Nabeela answered it well. And so I would just, you know, without citing the specifics of any one company, you know, benefits are inherently local. I think you think of benefits as a platform, right? In terms of what are the areas of benefits that are, you know, core to our business model and our team. And, you know, that's really how a large global corporation would think about it. I think the conversation of the day, because again, many companies are to be applauded, certainly those I'm engaged with, to be applauded for the investments they are making in modernizing their benefits platforms. And I think if you're wondering about ROI, just go back to the conversation we had earlier. We've lost 40 years of ground. What's that worth, you know, in terms of going back out and spending on attracting, training, and developing diverse talent? We just lost 4 decades of progress in a year. And so I think it is this conversation beyond the benefits, you know, of how, you know, we ask, I look at professional athletics, you know, female athletics, and you've seen this where, you know, there are not paid maternity leaves for female athletes. The endorsements don't have favorite, you know, the contracts don't have, you know, birth clauses, you know, I mean, it's just like, we're not meeting women where they are, or caregivers. And so how do we address this fact? Again, not at any one company, but that we require rigorous and largely inflexible schedules for people to stay on the team. And is that going to continue to work? And so I think this idea of meeting people where they are with this next level of mindset towards flexibility, policies that recognize the stage of someone's life, because when I'm in my 20s, I don't need what I need when I'm in my 50s, and vice versa. And so begin to take that next level of what kind of a climate are we creating in which we ask people to be most functional, and think more creatively about how to take that really, really forward. And I think that is this next level, more supportive, flexible, you know, that integrate life and work in a way that builds long-standing relationships with, you know, our team as one of our greatest assets.
Yeah, I think you make some really good points. I mean, certainly here in the US, as you mentioned, you know, we've lost 40 years of progress, but we've also, you know, awoken a lot of the organizations of the need to meet their employees and where they are, and the different life stages, and that they're actually still productive, working remotely and in flexible work arrangements. So,
yeah,
you know,
maybe one thought there, because you raise a good point. Companies are starting to realize they have greater recruiting advantage when they don't require somebody to move. I mean, think of what, you know, not for every job, and then I agree. I think the pandemic has taught us a lot about flexibility. To Nabeela's point, studies have shown that half the workload of keeping the house running all day long when the kids are there schooling and, you know, the laundry falls on women, more than half. So we are working, you know, doing an operating review, throwing in 3 loads of laundry, making lunch and coaching on French. And, you know, so I think this idea of we see flexibility works, but it hasn't necessarily been the norm. Nabeela's point was spot on.
Well, we certainly know how to multitask, don't we? Which is an important skill. Marta, I'll turn to you. You know, as you mentioned, IBM has pretty much retained, you know, and the women, you've not had the experience that perhaps we've had here in the US or even in Canada. You know, what has your organization done to retain women? And you've talked about it a little bit, but, you know, are there any policies that you think, you know, work well, that are standardized across the across IBM, or there's some obviously local ones as well?
Okay, one comment specific about what is good about the moms and us overall in terms of the IBM benefit across all the world. We have a minimum of 12 weeks of combined paid maternity and bonding leave to be set at minimum standard for birth moms. Okay, this is what the 12 weeks. And we have 4 weeks of paid leave for parents, women and men, as a minimum, including adoption, foster, or surrogate. Yeah, okay, we have this benefit around the world, okay, both minimum. For example, obviously, what is in Europe, we have in terms of the social protection standard is higher, you know, in terms of more than this in many of the European countries, but at least overall in all the other countries we have nothing. IBM gives it as a project. Overall, in terms, on top of this, in terms of the program for women and for all the population, but it's helpful for the woman, it's about the flexibility we have many years ago. Now we are living in terms of the COVID situation, but IBM has put this policy from many years ago, and it's very helpful in terms of the balance between what is your personal and professional life. And this is very, very important. I have lived in all my career, but you have this flexibility. You have to manage your life. This means it's not, it's going to be easy, always you have to continue the challenge because you have to continue with your career. But it's a very good tool you use in the right way, okay? How you are going to move, you organize yourself, depend of the age of your children, and even without no children, because but you have to manage your life, and you select the time perhaps you have to work, and perhaps even you work more, in terms of the number of hours, but you organize yourself. And for me, it's very powerful, and even the technology has helped a lot on this, okay, because we can do many things from home. And but it's not only the technology here, because it's more the policy overall, because you have to be the culture on the company. You are not to follow your employee if she is not there, because you have to understand what is the potential outcome when she's going to come back to you. And this is more the culture overall, because as you have the technology and you continue pushing everybody as you have to be at office, is the same that we have lived in the COVID situation. Okay, this is part of the flexibility that we have to, for me, is absolutely critical for the woman development, because perhaps it's more of the power tool to help in this way to work, okay? And this, now we can learn a lot from the COVID. We have in IBM for many years ago, but I think now we have perhaps to push this as a real important benefit for all the women in the companies, because we have demonstrated that it works, and we have to use it in the benefit of the woman, okay, and in the benefit of the population, but specifically with the woman.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a lot of these policies beforehand, whether it's, obviously paid leave, but also the flexibility that you already had in your culture that has kind of weathered some of the storm that we, the transition that we've experienced perhaps in here in North America. That's probably contributing to, some of the retention of your female leaders and staff.
No, yes, by the way, IBM, has, it's an American company, have overly globally,
Yeah.
It's have in them, but the focusing to have and continue growing in the women population is very important. It's not something you have to put the metrics, but you don't measure, perhaps you are going to have deviation, and you have to be, you can have in some countries, you can have in some business unit, in whatever, and you have to be clear that you need the metrics around the world, what is happening with the diversity overall, and especially with women.
Yes, and I'd like to actually shift our conversation to metrics now. I know that different organizations measure diversity in different ways. So some countries measure just gender, other countries measure gender, race, ethnicity, veterans, LGBTQ, disability. I mean, it's really, there's no standard way of measuring diversity. So I'd love to know from each of you how your organization defines diversity and how it's measured, and is it publicized both internally and externally, and just like to know a little bit about the transparency of those metrics. And perhaps I'll start with you, Jill.
Sure, and maybe I can speak to it from a public company board perspective, because I think in addition to a board's oversight being centered on strategy, leadership, and risk, and so people and and diversity are center plate, but also in this ESG environment, the environmental, social, and governance movement, where really now for investors in public companies, this idea of how does ESG impact your ability to generate long-term returns is top of mind. So things like, human capital development, worker safety, diversity, and an equitable, inclusive culture are really important. So on the board that I sit on, we have, I will say this, the disclosure frameworks are still in formation, right? So we have the SASB, we have the TCFD, we have the World Economic Forum, ISS, you know, there are a number. So one of the opportunities and challenges that public companies are facing is that there isn't a single yardstick. But so many boards, including the one I sit on, are starting to reveal, you know, workforce data in their sustainability report and putting it prominently on our website where prospective employees, investors, analysts, customers can come and look at it. So, you know, as I sit on the compensation committee, of course, we look at the pipeline. We have, you know, the management team have targets for diversity of the pipeline. Jim Fitterling, the CEO of Dow, you'll see him. I mean, Edie mentioned it. He's a very vocal proponent of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and he's following up with action. So his management team is very diverse, his board is very diverse, and they're working it at all levels of the pipeline. I think now too, as ESG causes us to think about things like social materiality, in addition to financial materiality, again, linked to long-term return generation, we're starting to ask questions as directors like, how do we know everybody on the team has a shot at success? And what is our responsibility to ensure everybody on the team, as we go through this tremendous period of digital disruption, will come along on the journey and come out the other side okay? And so it's fun for me as a director, although on the Dow board, I don't really feel like I have to be an agent of change, because I feel like I'm sitting around a table of very kindred spirits, people who not only believe this, but do around it. And so serving as agents of change to not only disclose these metrics, but ask the questions that are even further on down the line to catalyze progress.
Yes, that's great. Dow is certainly a leader in a lot of this. And Nabeela, I know Walmart publishes their workforce composition on the website. And, you know, maybe you can share with the audience kind of what you measure as an organization, and also a little bit about, you know, what's the reaction both internally and externally of having, you know, that publicized so broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I want to just zoom out a little bit. And when we look at our culture, diversity, equity, inclusion approach at Walmart, we actually have 4 guiding principles that really frame our approach. First and foremost, it's accountability. And I think Jill spoke to it, accountability from the very top all the way down, really creating that, you know, accountability through ownership and action and responsibility to create the environment and the culture to deliver the movement that we want to see. And then the second principle is data-driven decisions. So very focused on data and collecting and analyzing data and generating the verifiable insights that we need to make better decisions. Objectivity, I talked about this earlier as well, like how do we minimize subjectivity across our people practices, reduce the risk of bias across our talent processes, and lots of work happening internally around that. And then transparency is actually one of our core pillars in our approach, is increasing access to information, holding ourselves accountable internally and externally through communication and through reporting. And we've actually increased the frequency of our culture, diversity, and equity and inclusion reporting over the last year. We used to report annually. Now we publish report twice a year. And so we actually are creating more transparency, and the response has been overwhelming. I think both our associates and the market, you know, can see the progress that we're making. And I think that increased transparency and frequency of reporting also drives accountability and ownership, right? And allows us to make better data-based decisions. I also want to talk about efforts that we're taking on to modernize our measurements. So how do we actually use reporting, internal reporting and data collection to leverage technology to monitor both the performance indicators and the inclusion indicators that we have available within the organization, so that we can throughout the year really make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to the progress and the promotion of women and different diverse talent throughout our organization. Then I will say within Canada specifically, our reporting rolls into the overall reporting that Walmart does. And within Canada, similar to I think lots of countries in Europe, it's not customary to collect ethnicity and racial information. It's customary to collect gender, but not necessarily race or ethnicity or sexual orientation. But over the last year and a half, we've actually included voluntary identification in our process. And we had an overwhelming of 91% of our associates in Canada voluntarily identify different dimensions of diversity that represent them. And we've been able to layer that into our work in Canada. So I think, again, in the spirit of we're asking for this voluntary identification so we can hold ourselves accountable and report and create transparency. And there was an overwhelming response to volunteer that, to make that information available.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I know IBM as well publishes their workforce composition. I read their recent D&I report, as well as the pay equity studies that both actually Walmart and IBM disclose. Can you tell a little bit more about any diversity metrics and any challenges you had in making that transparent?
No, I think the diversity for us, okay, we published the diversity and inclusion report, and we did a few weeks ago, and we include all the dimensions, dimensions in terms of the gender, age, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, whether it's, religion, okay, many aspects. Now, this is important because in terms of all the aspects. And we are very proud of this report because for us, it's an important focus, and we have the diversity and inclusion in the payment of bonus of the executive of the company. This means high focus, and we have good progression in all the different population, and this is good. And this is for us on the opposite of the problem. I think we have only, personally only see benefit of this, report, because it's very transparent, it's very obvious, and it's very important that even the employees and the clients and the partnership, what is the progress we are doing. This is important for me, the transparency and the communication and the publish the data. This is very, very important for me. Is any problem, any concern, all the benefit to do it.
And you really hope that through leadership, at IBM and Walmart, that this creates a little bit of peer pressure for others to follow suit. So hopefully that's something that we see more of going in the future. I'm going to turn it over back to Aster to ask the final question. I know we're running out of time, so just wrap it up fairly quickly. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you. And I think Jill addressed my question was going to be around board and governance. And I think, Jill, you did a great job explaining the board's responsibility and accountability in this area. And Edie mentioned earlier, there has been, good movement toward increasing the number of board members or women members on the board. But we don't see the same level of urgency at the executive level. And my question to you is maybe just, a word or two, each one of you would be great. If you can share with us, how do we hold ourselves accountable as women on boards and as women executives who are sitting around the table in helping organization increase the number of diverse and women talent at all levels of the organization? Just quickly, maybe Jill, you want to start quickly and then we'll just.
Yeah, so there's different labor legislation applying to hiring boards versus management. And so I want to acknowledge that. But I think if you look at the enormous progress that's been made in the last couple of years in diversifying boards, I'm not an expert, but here's what I noticed. First, they looked for broader sets of expertise than prior CEO, CFO experience, right? Because of course, when you're looking at prior CEO, people with prior CEO and CFO experience, the majority of the time they're Caucasian males. And so, that's something I think, and there are people who without that experience that have a wealth of perspective that is needed and valuable. So I think there was some thought to balance. And then secondly, it's sort of, there were targets and there was a light shined, and sunlight is the best anesthetic, and the most the most forward looking organizations were in front of that. And then once ISS and, BlackRock and everybody else caught up, I think the incentive was there. And so people began to look, and lo and behold, when you look, you see qualified, diverse candidates, many of whom are women, everywhere. And then I think for each of us, you know, when I'm asked, when I get a call about a board seat or when I, you know, am asked with the boards I'm involved with, I only give women's names. I mean, I'm like, there's plenty, because I know so many talented, qualified women, and I cultivate those relationships, and I understand who in my network is interested in boards, and I'm constantly pushing those names, paying it forward. So I think there's big platform stuff we can all do, but at the end of the day, one step catalyzes the next step. And I think we have to continue to help each other.
Right. Well, thank you. I think we have to jump off to Edie now. I see that we're right on the hour. So Edie, maybe you want to wrap up if you have a minute.
Should we all stop and say how fruitful, illuminating this is, both on the personal level and the business professional levels? So thank you, Aster. Thank you, Jose. And extraordinary as we just think through, as Jill, you were so candid on talking about the imposter syndrome and the empowerment, also to tell your story so much. And is clearly, Nabeela, you really shared what you would have done again if you weren't such a workaholic and we all listened to you, et cetera. And Joe, you also talked so much about the public policy. And as we got into Marta, you talked about enjoy and passion and owning your career. And then we spent a lot of time on the public policy issues. And everyone is so acute that our recruiting and our upward mobility and retention, if we all get it right. And lastly, we ended up with so many strong metrics. And it's so clear as we go through Walmart's transparency and the 4 pillars that you talked, the frequency of reporting. At IBM, clearly the disclosures of your data, the leadership, and the executive level of changes, Jill, that you're seeing that is so pertinent in terms of driving, and all we're doing to accelerate other women upward, whether it's the C-suite or board. So thank you for the rich information. And as we close, I wonder if then, Jose, as we thank everyone, we truly say to this movement, thank you for lifting up other women. Jose, Aster?
I have to unmute myself. I wish we had more time, as always. I know this is just touching the, the tip of the iceberg, and we have, so much more that we'd like to share and discuss and learn from each other, but we will have that opportunity, as Edie mentioned, that we are looking to expand globally as an organization of WBC, and we are going to have more deep dive sessions just like this in the coming months. So just look for the email around that. And thank you to each one of the panelists for taking the time out and for your candor and your insights. And thank you to my co-moderator, Aster, for on this journey of this roundtable. Thank you for Edie, for your leadership and all that you do.
Thank you, everyone. It has been a really great event. Thank you. Thank you, Edie.
Thank you.
Thank you.